We will be recording the scene. So if you don't want to be on camera, what we're going to record it in speaker view, and so only those people who are speaking will be on screen. And so if you want to, if you don't want to be in the recording, you don't feel you have to contribute. If you do want to contribute, but you don't want to be in the recording, we'll just have to ask you to let us know that you don't want to be in that recording. We are going to hopefully post this on YouTube and share it a bit more widely so that people can join in the conversation. So I hope that's all right. Then from there, the next thing really is to say the main rule really is what people talk about as pass the mic. So don't hog the floor. I mean, I'm doing it a little bit, but that's necessary to make sure we're in the room. But try and keep yourself brief and succinct, and then we can hear from as many people as possible. I will sort of have chair's privilege of initially gently moving you along and possibly slightly less gently thereafter if I have to, but I'll try not to. And so that's the second rule. And then the third one is I describe as say where you're coming from, which obviously geographically all means Sevenoaks, so that's a bit clear, but in terms of where you're coming from in your personal experience, because it's really interesting to us to understand who the people in the room are, what the diversity of experience, what the backgrounds are that you're coming and contributing to this conversation from. We've got business owners, we've got emeritus professors, we've got teachers, so all of these things bring a really interesting context to what you're contributing. As part of that, and only as part of that, you'll note that in my name I've put LD, because what we want to try and do is keep party politics as much to the background of this as possible, but equally not let it sort of be a thing that ruins the meeting. So if you are making a point from a political perspective, or you're going to sort of come at this from a different angle, please do acknowledge where that's coming from. Either put it in your name. You can edit your name in the participants box again, as I have done. You'll see an option to rename if you hover over your own name. Or if you come into the conversation, please do say, because it's just so we can then leave it aside and otherwise have a really decent conversation as friends and fellow citizens of Sevenoaks. So that's all that I want to say in terms of ground rules, I think. The last thing from me then is to say a couple of little things just to get us into the conversation and set up, because after I do this 1 minute, then I don't get the chance to say anymore, because I'm just asking people questions. So just to frame things a little bit, the first thing, there's three things I want to say really. The first is a word on context, and I think that the starting point for this conversation isn't a kind of Sevenoaks is rubbish, Sevenoaks is bad, like we have to fix it, everything's good. The starting point is we live in a wonderful town, and we live in a time of change and challenge. And in that context, complacency really isn't forgivable. Like we need to acknowledge the challenges that we're stepping into, that we're living in, and we're going to hear about some of that from some experts in a moment, and then face into it together. So that's the first thing I want to say in terms of context. The second thing is about the power we have and you have in this room and in this community, which is really to say that it's not just about electoral politics and electing the council and so on. We have power at the moment. Just today I attended the launch of a new fund, £500,000 worth of match funding that Kent County Council are offering via crowdfunding. I've just posted the link in the chat. We'll send it around. Anyone in this room could get together with a couple of others, organise a project and use that platform to raise some funding, regardless of what's going on electorally, just to give one example. So we do have some power. Obviously, we might come back at the end to elections do make a difference as well, and making sure the politicians who are going to tap into these ideas and the people we put forward is a big part of it. But it's not just about that, is what I wanted to say. And then finally, before I shut up and bring in some much wiser people, I want to say a word about this isn't easy. We're not going to find a solution tonight. We go, that's the answer, everything's fixed. But that's really the point of this approach to having a meeting, which is to say, we're going to find answers because by working together, by talking to each other, by hearing from one another, because all of us are smarter than any of us. Any one of us can't fix everything, but if we work together and we all hear one another, then we might have a chance of doing something really special and making Sevenoaks the destination in the town that we all know it can and should and will be. So that's enough from me. I'm now going to ask Amy McEnroe to just say a few words. So Amy is the founder and owner of Sevenoaks, I think Sevenoaks' newest high street business, which is the wonderfully named and wonderful Knobbly Knees Eco Deli. So Amy, if you could just tell us a little bit, I mean, you've started a business in the midst of a pandemic, so you must be one of the bravest people in the world. Tell us a little bit about that, and maybe if you could share your reflections on what it's like to be on Sevenoaks, in Sevenoaks Town Centre at the moment, and any ideas you have for how the town centre could be even better.
Okay, so we started the process of starting our business before COVID really took off, and so we had committed some money and decided we're just going to go for it mid-pandemic, even if it's a really terrible idea, because we were sort of committed to what we wanted to do financially, and also, you know, ethically committed to what we want to do. So we have a plastic-free, zero waste, plant-based deli. And it's been really interesting to open up on the high street. And despite the pandemic, despite having a soft opening and the lockdowns, residents in Sevenoaks have been really supportive, and that's the thing that struck me the most. And I've noticed that, like, residents, people who live locally, shoppers in Sevenoaks, they will make an extra special effort to support the little independents that are on the high street. And that's been the most striking thing, really, that I've noticed. Obviously, we are a new business and we rely on footfall for lots of our custom, but people have said to me that they've come out specifically just to buy something small because they want to see the independents survive the pandemic. And I think that's really telling about what sort of high street that they're looking for in Sevenoaks. Yeah, so that's really my observation about what we've only been open since December, so what the first sort of 2-3 months of business experience we've got.
And in terms of your thoughts on what would make Sevenoaks an even better place to do business, to be on that high street, have you got any reflections that you'd offer?
Yeah, I've been thinking about it, and I mean, apart from the obvious things that make parking cheaper or free and things like that, it would help people choose Sevenoaks as a destination rather than going to Blue Water, for example. But the amount of independents that are in Sevenoaks is a real draw, I think, for people to come shopping there. And I think where Sevenoaks High Street's lost some of the big chain shops, like M&Co and the Edinburgh Woolen Mill, I think it's an opportunity to use these large spaces to have sort of indoor pop-up markets that give small indie traders a real leg up. And I don't know if anyone, like a little bit like the Corn Exchange in Leeds, which is quite a little trendy indoor market. There are loads in London, as you know, and I think it would fill these spaces with the sort of indie shops that I think that people of Sevenoaks want to see, because, you know, they've told me that they want to support the little independents. They don't want to see more chains move in to these shops. So I think it would be a really good opportunity for smaller businesses to grab a foothold, really.
The other thing you mentioned to me when I popped into your shop the other day was that the space outside the shop can be a bit restricted, is it?
Yeah, it can be. I mean, our shop, I feel like I live there. Our shop's on London Road, and the pavement, it's not necessarily narrow, but there's double yellow lines out the front, and we get an awful lot of loading and unloading from deliveries outside the front of the shop, and it does block the pavement, and it also blocks the vista for people, you know, when they're walking past or when they're driving past. It's unhelpful, I think, for trading to have sort of 7 or 8 times a day a DPD van blocking the entire frontage of the shop. I think looking at traffic flow and pedestrianising some of the roads more would really help people. I think it would help make it a nicer place to walk and to go shopping.
Thank you, Me. That's really, really great way to land us in the conversation and meet a new Sevenoaks entrepreneur. Thank you for joining us, and do keep chipping in. There's some I really love the way you sort of talked about the pop-up markets and then cited Leeds and the Corn Exchange as an example as a really good way of sharing ideas. So please do keep that up. I'm going to bring in Will Brett now. So Will I described him and he sort of cursed me for doing it as a national high streets expert. I think he deserves that title. And Will's going to just say a little bit more. I'm going to post a link to the report that he's recently co-written, which was called Take Back the High Street. It was published by the community business organisation Power to Change in partnership with the National Lottery Community Fund. I'm going to post the link to that in the chat and we'll send it around later. But Will's going to just set the national context a little bit and then maybe tell us about 1 or 2 of his favourite examples that we might draw some inspiration from. Will, over to you.
Thanks so much, John. Thanks for inviting me. I have to confess straight off the bat that I have never been to Sevenoaks, which I apologise for to all of you. But as soon as I come, which will be soon, I'm sure, I will go straight to Knobley Knees Deli, which sounds perfect. That's the kind of thing you want on the high street. So I thought I really want to kind of talk a bit about COVID and what that means for high streets, because that's obviously a really big deal. But there's a couple of bits of context beforehand that's important to kind of think about. The first for me is always this point that high streets are deeply meaningful places, which isn't automatically what you might think of when you think of high streets, but for me they're deeply meaningful, and they always have been. So in the deep history of high streets, when they were in its medieval history, these were civic spaces. They were spaces for trading. They were spaces for people to come together, to trade, to do politics, to do work. You had guild halls, you had more churches, you had lots of public space and lots of activity in town centres. And they were places which people really identified with. And that's true all throughout history. So through all the commercial period, the massive expansion of commercial activity in the industrial period in the 19th century, high streets maintain their sense of meaning. And even in recent years, where I think a lot of people have felt a bit disillusioned about high streets being very similar to each other around the country, this idea of clone high streets, which had the same shops on them all over the country. Even then, these are places which people connect to fundamentally when they live in a place. If you think of the place where you live, for all of you, that's Sevenoaks, or nearly all of you, I think, that's Sevenoaks. I would have thought that the high street is one of the first things you think of when you think of the place you live. It's a sense of identity, a sense of belonging that this place gives you. It's incredibly important. And even if it's got chain shops on it, it's really important. I once did an event on high streets, and it was just after Debenhams had announced a lot of closures all over the country. And one of my panelists, I said that it really matters to people when a Debenhams closes, when one of these anchor stores closes on their high street. It's a sense of loss, a sense of grief that people feel. And I was kind of laughed at a bit for saying that, but it's true. If you go to Wolverhampton and you ask people what they feel about the fact Debenhams is closed, it really matters to them. It's a sign of civic pride being lost. It's a sign of things going downhill, and people care. So I just think it's really important to keep that idea in mind, that high streets are places for civic pride, places that really matter. But obviously, the other big bit of context is that mass retail is in huge decline in terms of bricks and mortar retail, and that's been going on well before COVID. As you all know, you've got lots more out-of-town shopping centres, you've got lots more online retail growing very fast, and Britain is one of the biggest countries in the world for online retail. We absolutely love buying things online. and it's very easy for us to do it because it's because of the way that the country is distributed. We do online retail really well, and that's really making a lot of high streets suffer. And the effect of COVID is to accelerate that process of the decline of high street retail massively. And by the way, it's not just retail, it's also hospitality. So a lot of the chain restaurants and fast food shops and so on are suffering badly as well as chain retail. And it's not clear how it's all going to pan out. And I'm really looking forward to hearing, how things are going in Sevenoaks. It's a really interesting example of a place which is, in the sort of London orbit, but has its own identity. There's a lot of kind of assumptions being made about commuter towns. In fact, in both directions. So some people are saying that places in the kind of London area, if you like, sort of, 25 to 50 miles outside London, some people are saying they're going to be in real trouble, the high streets, as a result of COVID. Some people are saying they're going to be getting a boost because more people are staying at home, working from home. There's going to be less commuting into town, and you've got more footfall on high streets. It's not clear how it's going to pan out, but what's definitely clear is that you're going to have an enormous amount of change because of all of the changes which are happening anyway on the high street because of the decline of retail, combined with all of the changes which are happening, if you like, in the marketplace of people's behaviors. So people working from home, working more in their hometowns, and therefore having more and different demands of their public space or their civic space. John, do you want me to talk a bit about just a few examples of what's going on? Or?
Yeah, that's great. But I think cap it off with a few of your favorite things that we should look to and get excited about.
Okay, yeah. So I think I wanted to just talk about 3 examples of places which are doing something about high streets with the idea of putting communities more in charge of them. So putting people themselves, local people, having more influence over and ownership of high street properties and what goes on high streets. And the first is in Plymouth, where you have on one street in Plymouth, which is called Union Street, an incredibly rundown street. It's been run down for a very long time, ever since all of the shipping started to decline in Plymouth. So for a good, 40, 50 years, Union Street has been in trouble. Lots of derelict shops, lots of derelict buildings. And the community there, or rather a very gritty social entrepreneur there called Hannah, plus a couple of her friends, managed to get hold of one of these buildings for temporary use, then managed to buy it. And over the space of 10 years, very slowly and with a lot of hard work, has taken into ownership, into community ownership, because the organization she runs has membership drawn from the community and is a not-for-profit, has taken now 3 buildings into community ownership, including a huge, fantastic Art Deco theatre, which has been empty essentially for 50 years, apart from a brief period when it was a nightclub in the 80s. And what that means is that that organization is running all sorts of things from those buildings. They're running community cafes, they're running shared affordable workspace, sort of shared ownership flats. And they can be incredibly responsive to what people in the area want because it's community owned. They're not locked into any model, and they can just, work in the interests of the community. But the thing about Plymouth is that they're doing that despite the council. So the council has got lots of money from the government from the Future High Streets Fund, and is doing a pretty conventional, regen of some of the bigger town centre areas in Plymouth, and they've ignored completely this incredible thing that's going on Union Street. Whereas elsewhere in the country, so obviously it's really hard for Hannah and her organisation to get anywhere when the council's not on their side. Whereas elsewhere in the country, you can see what happens when the council does get involved. So one example is in Stockton-on-Tees, which has for quite a while now had a pretty smart council that is prepared to do quite radical things. What they did about 5 or 6 years ago, with a lot of decline in their town centre, they set up a kind of street theatre area and a whole programme of festivals in the summer. Because they knew that there were enough, they'd talked enough to the community to understand that there were enough local arts businesses and theatrical companies and so on to sustain that kind of cultural offer. It's incredibly successful. It really drove footfall to the town, all in the area, one of the key cultural offers in the area. And now, since COVID, they've decided to knock down basically half of their high street and build a massive park, which sounds, you know, pretty radical. It is pretty radical. It's a little bit worrying because it's, you know, it's a council that, you know, is really kind of going for it. And, you know, you got to think big in times like this when there's so much change, but you just sort of question whether they've got the community with them. And, you know, lots of people, of course, want more green space and so on, but they're having to act quickly. And it may be that they're acting just a little bit too quickly without bringing the community with them. So what I would really advocate most strongly is the sort of ideal situation where you have communities and community organizations working hand in glove with the council in committed partnership to regenerate town centres and high streets. And that's what's happening in Dumfries. So if anyone wants to check it out, I can post some links on the chat. But in Dumfries in Scotland, there's some fantastic example of a community organisation taking ownership of 8 buildings along the high street with the support of the council, you know, but buying into the council's vision. And that is going to change what has been quite a depressed Scottish town for quite a long time. That is going to change it for good, I think. And it's a really exciting.
Thanks so much, Will. There's some really powerful stuff in there, and this idea of like actually expanding the thinking and expanding the conversation beyond the immediate of shops and business and sort of retail businesses and into that idea of public space. And kind of, I think in the report you talk about space for citizenship, which is a phrase I'm sure you'd expect me to love, but I think that spirit's really powerful. And it makes me think that one of the things that stood out for me, we've had some conversations locally, and some people are saying there's nothing to worry about, like Sevenoaks is was ranked in the top 10 vibrant high streets in the country in this report. And then I realized that it was what's the report called? Harris Danes Harris or something like that. And you talk about this in your report as actually the top 10 also includes Bluewater, Westfield, and something. And it's like, well, what does vibrant really mean? Is kind of community as well as retail. And that's not to say it's not one or the other, but that sort of spirit. And Dumfries, 8 buildings. We're very proud in Sevenoaks of the Stag Theatre, but I think that sort of spirit, that it's not just one thing, it's a whole town, and a whole town centre is really powerful. That brings us beautifully on to Vic Granville and Roger Lee, and I'm going to come to Vic first. Vic is currently messaging me in the chat to make sure I also mention the wonderful Elizabeth Purvis, who I would never forget. But Vic Granville, Roger Lee, and Elizabeth are the 3 people behind this wonderful project, Sevenoaks in a Time of Change, which is a book that you can get in the wonderful Sevenoaks bookshop, which I think has just won a national prize tonight itself. So do go along and get that. But Vic, I want to start with you. Would you tell us a little bit more about the genesis of that project, where that started from?
Oh, yes, well, I will really briefly. I mean, first of all, it's lovely to hear from Amy, and really nice to hear from Will as well. And, you know, all new things in the town are a real delight for us. But the project, Sevenoaks in a Time of Change, was a photographic project really to record the contribution of all the people who work in town. So it was, we got everybody standing outside their shops, and Roger Lee photographed them for this record for the future. It was, they are community. They're the people who make the community in Sevenoaks town. Without them, there's no reason to come in. There's nothing to do in Sevenoaks, perhaps have a cup of coffee. But it's these people. I think we photographed 668 people, and it was probably about half of the total, because a lot of the professional businesses and multiples wouldn't be photographed. So there are thousands of people in town every day who come in from outside, who turn Sevenoaks into this extraordinary community centre. There is no other way of replicating that, this marketplace that we have, where we meet, exchange ideas, and all these people look after us. So it was an absolute delight to do that. And we wrote a book, Elizabeth, Roger, and I wrote a book as well, which I think you've just flashed up, which explains the importance of towns, Sevenoaks particularly, but towns in general. And I should really hand over to Roger here, because he's the expert on how these things work.
Go on then, Roger. Do you want to come in and pick up from there?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, yeah, the first thing to say is that the Sevenoaks 2020 Sevenoaks in a Time of Change was such a great idea, because partly for the reasons that you've already mentioned, that town centres were under threat, but they're really meaningful places. And I'd just like to take up a point that Will made, which is the town centres have got deep meaning, and it's absolutely true. They've got agency as well. That's the other thing about them. They do things to us as well as have things done to them. So, for example, when I go up to town on a Saturday morning, for example, I often count the number of people I say hi to and know. And it's always in double figures. So some of them I know well, some of them I don't know very well. But that gives me a sense of place. It gives me a sense of belonging. It gives me this sense of where I am. And so it's really very important. And there's been some really interesting research done recently, for example, on the decline of pubs, local pubs, not chain pubs, but local pubs in towns, which have had a serious political effect on those places. This loss of community, this loss of identity has generated all sorts of political responses which are not especially welcome in all sorts of ways. So, yeah, town centres have got a great deal of agency, and they are critically important in our lives. And they're really important also for environmental reasons. We need to reduce the use of the car. We need to reduce the length of supply chains. We need to do all sorts of things to generate more local production and consumption, not just the consumption from the businesses in Sevenoaks, but the production which supplies them. And the development of town centres, especially if one could use them in a way which enabled easy pedestrian access and circulation, means that they will fulfil this role of, as some people call it, a sense of shared fate within a local community, because that helps all of that. So really, really important to sustain them in that way. And of course, they're important economically. Victoria mentioned that there are literally thousands of people. My estimate is that it's difficult to say, but my estimate would be that there'd probably be about 2,500 people working in the centre of Sevenoaks every day. And when you think that Sevenoaks town has a population of about 20,000, that gives you some sense of how significant that number is. And what is more, nearly 50% of all the activities in Sevenoaks are independent, to take up Amy's point. They are independent businesses. They've got great diversity. They've got, as Amy demonstrated quite clearly, enormous vitality. And these things therefore contribute to the town. And what's more, in Sevenoaks, there is this great mix of retail, of professional services, of personal services, legal services, financial services, computer services, as well as this great range of retail activities. And these things feed off each other and they work together. So that is a great thing going for Sevenoaks Town Centre. And of course, one of my interests in a previous life was interested in the local circulation of local money, the idea that often local areas could set up their own little mini economy. And the multiplier effect of spending money locally is enormous. Some estimate it as being something like 5 times the amount of money is generated from an initial expenditure of money. And then, of course, as I've already said, there is this great social and cultural significance of town centres. So they're immensely important, and they will remain important. They were important before COVID, they remain important after COVID, and they are continually under threat from, of course, out of town shopping, internet retailing and all the rest of it. So they cannot be allowed to disappear, they cannot be allowed to be diminished, and they've got to be sustained and enhanced in all sorts of ways. And in turn, they will sustain and enhance us. So in a sense, that's the kind of background. That was one of the reasons why I got involved in this fantastic project. And what's interesting about that is that the project was driven as much by the people who were being photographed as it was by us in setting up the photographs. They were so supportive, so enthusiastic, so engaged, so dynamic that the thing just drove, in a sense, drove itself. The result of it, it was this book and a great insight, as far as I'm concerned, into what's often invisible in a town centre, which is the energy that is being brought to it every day by all those people who are owning and working in it.
Thank you so much for that, Roger. And I should say I meant to introduce you as also, I mean, I feel like it was probably good to hear from you first before outing you as a emeritus professor of economic geography, so people now know that you're talking from a position of some expertise on these matters. But just before we open to the floor, because I do want to start bringing in ideas, and like time is flying by us. But I know you've been party to a particular idea, a particular sort of vision project for how Sevenoaks Town Centre would change. I'm gonna post the links for people in the chat, and we'll send it around later. But I think Roger Fitzgerald, a friend of yours, I think, has been behind this. But maybe you could just say a few words about this particular idea, this particular proposal.
Yes, absolutely. I mean Roger Fitzgerald's ideas are really a kind of vision for what Sevenoaks could be, what it is and what it could be. Not just a response to COVID. It's a response in part to the kind of orientation of Sevenoaks. It's a predominantly north-south town centre, which makes life a little bit difficult to have a genuine central place in Sevenoaks. The two north-south roads tend to dominate. And as Roger himself said, his ideas are ideas, they're not proposals. And it seems to me there are two basic strands to them. One is addressing the built environment of the town centre, and the other is the commercial environment of the town centre. And thinking about the built environment, I think there are probably two levels at which that works. One is a relatively immediate potential for relatively small scale changes, making space for outdoor cafes, providing much more circulation space for pedestrians, landscaping at the town centre, providing more seating, more signage, for example. And a very good example of what might be involved there is signing much more clearly to one of the jewels in Sevenoaks town centre, and it is part of the town centre in many ways, which is Knoll, of course, and Knoll House, which is how many towns can boast that kind of facility immediately adjacent to the town centre, and that could be enhanced enormously by providing communication and signage to it. So there are all sorts of relatively straightforward and not too expensive things that could be done in the short term, but he also has the idea of enhancing the east-west dimension of Sevenoaks, and maybe on the east side of the high street, the so-called backlands, as one of the developers describes it, could be drawn into the town centre, links provided to the library and to the leisure centre. And another point that Will made about the public realm, really important. Again, a lot of research has been done to show how a thriving and well-resourced and provided for public realm has enormous benefits for the economic and commercial success of a town. These are not separate items. They are very much interlinked with each other. And his suggestion there is for a market to provide a central place within Sevenoaks, and they're great ideas, and also to provide some, again, landscaping and places for people to circulate and walk about. A garden, perhaps, as part of that, to enable people to sit and enjoy the town. It's been interesting during COVID how well used the small park at the northern end of the high street has been, even in the freezing cold. I've seen people sitting there in the snow, drinking coffee, talking to each other, socially distanced, of course, but wanting to make contact and using that space even in those circumstances. So Roger's suggestions, which are suggestions, they're ideas, they're not specific proposals, for the built environment, really important. And then on top of that, of course, it's another element which needs to be addressed is, and again, Will alluded to some of this, the need to enhance the virtuality of the high street in order to plug into the possibilities of the internet, to enable independent businesses to market themselves, possibly to have single checkout points for multiple businesses. And again, there are lots of examples around the country. Hebden Bridge is one that springs to mind immediately, but there are others which have done this sort of thing. So that's another area where the town centre can enhance itself, make it even more resilient, even more vibrant than it is now. So these two areas, built environment, commercial environment, and different, excuse me, different levels of immediacy for them, but lots and lots of very interesting ideas that would make a massive difference to what is already a thriving, and I'm sure it will continue to thrive, town centre, and therefore allow it to do things to us which we want it to do.
Lovely. Thank you so much for that contribution, Roger. I'm going to start coming to the floor. So if you've got ideas or references or challenges or questions that are for us to think about as a town, do start to post them. I've already got I've got John Roberts I'm going to come to in a minute, and Nick Rushby as well, have been posting in the chat and to me. But I'm going to come first to someone else, to Jane Burston, who's been posting and was recently in Sevenoaks Chronicle, who's an air quality expert. And Jane, you've had a look at the Sevenoaks Society, the Roger Fitzgerald plans as well. Do you want to just share your thoughts and any other ideas you've got? I don't think we can hear you, Jane. Are you? Yeah, I think we've got you now. Try again.
Okay, hopefully that works. So yes, as you say, I work on air quality, and I've recently moved to Sevenoaks from central London and was quite surprised to find out that the air quality on the high street is really quite poor, especially when it gets quite congested. So one of the ideas that I was very keen to see was I'm very supportive of, was a suggestion of making the whole high street system a one-way system. I think that would reduce congestion significantly, really improve air quality, and just make the pavements and the pavements more walkable and the roads more cyclable. One of the things that I've found out through my job is that oftentimes people think that it can affect footfall on the high street if people can't access the high street by car. And actually, the opposite is true. You might need to get to a park and ride, but the more walkable and cyclable a high street is, actually the higher the footfall, the more time people spend on a high street and the more money they spend there. And that's been found in lots of research projects. So it tends to be the opposite of what people think. I also think that having things like a park, Roger was mentioning the park at the top of the high street, having places where people can go away from the traffic and green spaces is also really good for air quality, and spaces where people can kind of segregate themselves. So kind of tree barriers away to separate the cars and pedestrians.
Some lovely ideas there. Thanks, Jane. I'm going to come to John Roberts now. John was putting in the chat about suburbanisation, I think. John, do you want to just say a little bit more, and if there's any examples you want to cite and any places we should look for inspiration?
Yeah. Oh, this is great. It's a new word for me today, and it's the second time it's cropping up, because I don't normally hang out with economists, but this is Roger's my second one today. I've been doing the preparation work for a webinar that we're doing with the American Society of Civil Engineers, looking at the impact on commercial development in Middle East, UK, and in America. And it's I think focused mainly on city centres. But one of the big things I was hearing from the US participants was about suburbanisation, which has been going on for a while. It's to do with the age group of people, and that over there in some ways, but now has really accelerated during the pandemic. And as a result, there's a kind of change in housing mix in the big cities, but also this tendency to move out. And I think Will was talking earlier about this balance about whether or not we're going to benefit from it, or whether or not we're going to or whether or not we're actually going to have a detriment. By what they're saying is it seems to be a benefit for the towns around the outside of the big cities. And I think many of the things, if we can get it right, you're going to get a whole bunch of new people coming out here who are going to spend more time in the town. I know I've actually changed the way I work now, and actually I'm spending much more time here rather than dragging myself off to Dartford or London, which is very pleasant. I'm very pleased to be here, and I wish we could actually, I could have made more use of it over the last year. But that will increase my spending here as opposed to buying a sandwich in London. So I think those sort of businesses would be great, and also workspaces in the middle of town would be good.
I just, as you were talking, my brain is bouncing back to Jane and to you as well, and thinking like that thing of like more people coming here, more of us spending more of our time and money here as well. And Jane's point about park and rides and how Sevenoaks could be more of a focal point. And I was just thinking about those electric buses you find in places like Manchester sort of fizzing around, and as you were talking about how cities are changing as well. So there's some really interesting ideas, but I love your sort of ambition for us, John, of like we could show the way forward here, really, couldn't we? I mean,
well, I've spent nearly all my life in design, and but one of the interesting things we were debating here earlier, because it's changed. Why are you here in Sevenoaks? And everybody would have a different reason for it. The reason we've been around Sevenoaks and Oxford, since the, I think it was 1991 or something. That's changed to our life as children come and go, and jobs come and go. So everybody will have a different view of that, and also potentially we're going to see a population shift. We've got new neighbours moving in at the moment, almost literally in the last 2 days ago, next door, coming out of London, we expect. So. That's going to shift why people are here, and therefore once you know why people are here, you can then design the town to be what people want and need.
Yeah, very good. I'm going to come now to Nick Rushby, who I think has been doing some research and some thinking around this. Nick, do you want to say a bit more about what you're up to? You've got Oxford in your name. You're stealing a march on us and taking all our ideas, I'm sure. Go on, Nick.
Well, we do have a high street. It's in two parts. One is in the high street and the other is a parade of shops on the Sevenoaks Road. Yes, the Independent Republic of Oxford, as one or two district councillors have sometimes referred to us. I have to say I've been very heartened by what I've heard so far, because I sit on the Sevenoaks District Business Board, and they, in 7 months, haven't got this far. There's this sort of feeling on the business, but I should say the business board is comprised of some district councillors, some of the SDC officers, and a number of representatives from different businesses around Sevenoaks. And there's been an awful lot of talking and a sort of sentiment that wouldn't it be nice if we could all go back to the way it was in 2019? And what do we have to do to achieve that? And that seems to me to be the wrong question. That we have this opportunity, and Roger's been alluding to it, Jane's been alluding to it, Will's been alluding to it. We have this opportunity to develop a vision of what we would like Sevenoaks to be like in 2 years' time, 5 years' time, 10 years' time. And surely that has to be the starting point. Not how do we get back to where we were 18 months ago, because that is never going to happen. Yeah. And even if it was possible, it is probably not desirable. And hence my post, is somebody capturing this lot, so that we can have a succinct vision. I do a spot of business consulting and stuff on the side.
I'm going to tap into you, Nick. This is great. No,
one of the things, one of the proverbs out of the Bible, which actually has some meaning for me, is this: where there is no vision, the people perish. If you don't have a vision of what Sevenoaks High Street, what the town centre of Sevenoaks is going to look like in the future, then surely we're going to get there. We'll get somewhere. It won't be where we want to be, but we'll get there.
Thank you so much. And I think the challenge, I'll say a word in a minute about how we've got a couple of ideas for how we take this forward. But I just want to ask you before we let you go, Nick, what does right for the goldfish mean? I think we must all be thinking that. Can you just give us a
sorry about that. In my spare time, I'm secretary of the Archbishop's Palace Conservation Trust in Oxford, and I have a theological objection to anti-social media like Facebook. However, it's an inevitability. So I've been learning, instead of writing, scholarly papers and stuff like that. I'm told you have half a second to
Excellent.
get the message across. And that's a little bit like the time span of attention of a goldfish.
Very
Right,
good. Very good challenge to all of us. I'll take that. I'm going to come now to Marilyn Canay, who's a esteemed local figure. Marilyn, what have you got to contribute to this? What's your thinking?
Some of my thinking is to do with the fact that we have a huge number of young people who go to Sevenoaks School, which is historically one of the great schools of England. And so we have something like 1,100 students there. I don't know how many teachers and staff, 200 probably. So it's a very big asset right in the middle of our town. And we need more things that will encourage young people to go there. Many of these privileged young people have money to spend, want to do things, want to be involved. A lot of them have good social consciences. And we need to meet some of their aspirations, I think. We also have one of the oldest girls' schools in the country at Walthamstow Hall, so another great institution right on the edge of the town centre. So we have all these young people right in the middle of our town who want to be involved, want to have things like Big, the new shop, to cater for their needs and to involve them. A lot of them have small business enterprises they might like to show in some sort of community facility.
I love that. Love that. How do we bring the schools and we've got so many great schools, so many great young people. How do we really bring them into this? And yes. I'm thinking about Amy McEnroe's thought of the sort of the indoor pop-ups and whether those things could like the young enterprise and those could be.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you so much, Marilyn. That's really, really wonderful. I'm gonna come now to Jack, who hasn't said any more about himself, but let's hear a word from you, Jack. What have you got to say for yourself? What's your thinking?
Yeah, hey guys. I think I was just going back to, I think it was what Nick said about, it does scare me that people say, I can't wait to get back to normal and, yada, yada, yada. And I think there's a real opportunity there for some change. And I think, one thing that we've been focused on as a business is the waste that's being produced. I think there's a real opportunity there. I think that, it was already a problem, like this, the thing we're producing, the cups that we're producing, the lids that we're producing. We've been a big part of the problem, and I think it's been magnified by the pandemic. And I think we're selling ourselves a little bit short. There's a town in New Zealand where they're actually like a single-use free town, and it's a massive attraction. People go from all over the country to visit this place, and I feel like if we could be we sort of can. Oh, sorry, because my Wi-Fi is struggling a little bit. Can you hear me now?
We got the town in New Zealand. Can you tell us what it's called? We can have a look at that. Or do you need to look it up? Carl said Jack's referring to Raglan, New Zealand. So everybody knows Jack is founder of Otto's coffee house on the top of the high street and at River Hill. So do go and meet him. We might have to leave you there, Jack, I think, so we can't quite hear you. But but thank you for that. That's pretty
worries.
I'm going to come now to Sandra Robinson. You've had your hand up for a little while. What's your perspective? What would you like to contribute to this?
Hi, thanks, John. You wanted us to tell where we were coming from. I'm an economist, so I was delighted to hear Roger speaking. My bringing is that the fact that I grew up as an expatriate, and I've lived in the Netherlands and Belgium and Australia, and I've traveled to over 35 countries for my work. And high streets are different in each city, but what has struck me since I came to live in England is how undervalued high streets are, not by locals, but by any planning further up. So talking about, say, in the Netherlands, in Sevenoaks High Street, as a mother with young children, I felt aggressed, if I can use that word, by cars shooting through and HEVs shooting through. Something as simple as the one-way system, the triangular one-way system, 20 miles per hour. The moment you enter Sevenoaks, I think the whole of Sevenoaks should be a 20 miles per hour zone. It's as simple as that. There is no God-given reason why we have 30 miles per hour. I feel quite passionate about that because my father was in charge of road safety for the whole of the EU. He's just died at age 98. But the 30 mile an hour speed limit was a 1930s invention, and I think Tony and I are in great agreement on this. There is no reason to cling to 30, and when people are given 30, they do 40. And it is very unpleasant being on the high street with young children with cars and HEVs going through. It's so fun. Now, in Holland, where they have got rid of pavements and the street is shared by pedestrians and cyclists and cars, it is staggering how slowly the cars will go and how careful they are, because they know they're on the same level with all these young children on their bicycles and prams. I think people think it's more dangerous. Actually, as far as I can see, it's safer. The other thing to say...
Oh, go on, Sandra, one last thing.
There are two more things. One is I wanted to say, we have to remember what the age distribution of Sevenoaks is. It's parents with children under 18. And just to be nerdy, if you put a compass point in the middle of the town and you draw a 5-mile circle, you get 28 schools. And most of our traffic is parents having to take children to school. And that's not just the private schools, that's the state schools which don't have enough space, so someone has to go out of area. You can't expect those people to take their children to school at 7:30 or 8 o'clock in the morning by bicycle. That traffic is still going to be there. And we have to find a way of managing that traffic, because that is what rush hour in Sevenoaks is. It's the school run. That's one thing. And sorry, I just made a note.
One more thing, can you? Sorry, I just want to
I'm
squeeze
sorry.
one more person.
No,
Sorry,
please, can we have a campaign to take out old street furniture? There are so many signs up there. It's so ugly. It's so miserable. We need a campaign to take those away. Thank you for letting me talk for so long. Okay, bye.
You're brilliant, Sandra, as ever, and those ideas are great. I think that shared space thing, Poynton up in Cheshire is somewhere I go every now and then, and that's a main road through there, but shared space seems to work very well. I'm going to squeeze in one more person. I'm going to squeeze in Astra, and then we're going to, and then I'll say a little bit about where this is going next, and then we'll have a closing word from a friend. Go on, Astra.
Hi, I am a well, sort of business owner with my other half as well. He's a business owner in Sevenoaks. We kind of not really related to that necessarily, more on the fact that on the social side of things is that there's so many wonderful places that they're like courtyards and pedestrian areas in Sevenoaks that just aren't utilised enough. So for example, where Otto's is, and that's lovely seating area, and it's just so buzzing and wonderful when that is open. But there's nothing that goes into the evening, and it'd be such a wonderful thing to sort of make use of those spaces more.
Lovely, thank you, great contribution. Right, there's so many ideas, and in a way it feels frustrating because they're just beginning to flow, but we do want to set ourselves the tone of sticking to our timing as much as we can. I think we might run over a minute or two, but I just want to say a word about where we're going next, and then hand over to Richard Stretfield to close us out. So the thing I wanted to show you is just where we're holding these ideas. So this, hopefully you can see my screen now. This is a platform called All Our Ideas, and I'll post the website in the chat. We'll send it around an email afterwards. But this is a little tool where you can vote, and someone's been filling in these ideas. So become a famous zero waste town like Raglan, New Zealand, or reduce rates for shops to include. I'm going to vote on Raglan, so I'll vote for that one. And then another two options come up, or you can click I can't decide, or you can add your own idea down here at the bottom. And you see there's already 500 odd votes on 22 ideas, and this is going to give us a really good, so you'll see some of the rankings here. So make the central triangle one way and widen the pavements to make it easier for pedestrians seems to be coming out top at the moment. So if you want to post your ideas and into that and keep sharing them, and we will be writing this up and make sure that oh, I'm trying to pin myself. Making sure that we come back to you and share some of these things, so we can figure out where we go next with this, because it feels like this has been a really vibrant conversation, and so we will write it up, we will share it around, and then we'll, like as I said, there's this crowdfunding opportunity where we can put together bids and apply for funding, but there's also, to finish us off, there is also a county council election at the moment, and so I'm going to, it is the Liberal Democrats that have put this together. We're doing it not for the Liberal, but we do this sort of thing because this is what we think, this is what we want politics to be like. We want politics to be a conversation between friends about how we make our place better. And so to just sort of end the session, I'm going to ask Richard to say a few words. Richard's the county council candidate for Sevenoaks Town. So Richard, over to you, if you can join us.
Yeah, there we go. Thank you, John. Just 3 words from me. First of all, I think it's really important that this was a small p political event, and this is the only time when it's got a large P in front of it. And so for the politics of this, I think, and going back to some of the discussions, the most important thing that we can help with is the vision thing. And as I've been listening to all the various extremely good ideas and seeing them all come up in the chat, I was just thinking that probably the essence of Sevenoaks is to be the very model of a modern market town. I think people really love the idea of the market. I think they like the idea that it's not just commercial, that it's cultural, that it's political, that it's entertaining, that it's social, and all of those words. If you did a word map of the conversation this evening, things like team, community, partnership, cultural, cross-generational, are all things that are kind of coming to the fore in how we see our town. However, we do have to take into account that the last year, that whilst, as Will said, things were changing before, the accelerator pedal has been pressed pretty hard on our shopping habits particularly, but also on social and public health matters. But we also know that whilst this period has been very difficult, that we have further difficulties coming down the track in the form of climate change. And so the one thing that any vision must be for Sevenoaks is resilient to those changes. And I think we all understand much better now how much more investment we need to give in time and in money to building the resilience of our lives. And that has been shown in public health most recently, but will be shown in future by climate change. And all of those things are important when we think right down to our communities, is how are the shops going to survive? Where are we going to socialize? How is our town going to work to maintain its essence as a really vibrant market town, but under the pressure of all these different things that we know are going to happen? And the one thing that I will finish with is to say that this has got to be, whatever your political persuasion, has got to be about teamwork. We are only ever as strong as our weakest link. The pandemic has shown that absolutely in stark terms, that we need to act as a community, that we can't, even if we have differences of opinion about how things are run, we can have that in a very constructive way. And I hope this evening has demonstrated that in absolutely clearly. And so I would like to thank, as my final point, thank you, John, for chairing so well, and for the contributors, especially to Will and Amy to front up and do the provocations, but everyone else for being here and for contributing so politely as well as so passionately.
Thank you so much, all. That's us for the evening. We will be out with next steps and a write-up and some ideas for where we go from here. But for now, thank you all for coming. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll see you soon, I hope.
Thank you.
Thanks. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thanks, John.